People in life are looking for how do I make a life worth living? And how do I make a life worth having? You see, the difficulty for most people is that they are trying to figure out what's what in the world. The rules of life are pretty straightforward. The rules of life have been passed down from generation to generation to generation through all of the sages, through all of the leaders, through all of the Christian rites, through all of the Catholic priests, through all of the Jewish monks, if you will, and I'm not great at their terminology, but the truth is that the Torah, which is the original book of the Bible, as it's called, is the most profound. It talks quite clearly in Leviticus about the law and how the law should be applied in the world. It also gives the Ten Commandments in several different portions of that book in different ways so that people who read different parts of the Bible will understand the Lord's laws. The Lord's laws are quite straightforward. They go pretty well in hand with the real world that we currently live in, the rules of life. You see, most people don't recognize international law, but anyone who is here internationally must recognize the international law. The International Human Rights Declaration says that a person has many freedoms. They have freedom to their personhood, which is their entire body, that no one has the right to do one thing to their body without their knowledge, without their consent, without their permission. It also says that we have access to unencumbered technology, that we openly have the right to use computers, to use telephony, and to literally do what we need to do to produce a living. It also says we have the right to produce a family of our own choosing. That means we can leave our birth families, walk away from them as it talks about in the Bible, in the relationship with a significant other. And I use that term to be politically correct because the Lord God makes all people. So it's foolish not to say that term for everyone. That everyone has the right to produce a love relationship with one person to produce their new family unit. That is allowed in the Bible. It is also allowed in many other religious works that I have read as a devout spiritual person. Now, in my lifetime, I've only experienced theft during the last 5 or so years of my life. Someone immorally and illegally got into my home and stole a medical prescription. On top of that, they stole some Japanese artifacts. And then what happened was I moved into a community after leaving my beautiful townhome in Carmel, and I lived in a place called Noblesville, where they had two types of units in that apartment complex. They had the impoverished kind of HUD housing, and they had regular housing. They didn't distinguish the property in terms of who was who, but there are plenty of people who have an inability to leave other people's property alone. These people have lied to themselves underneath international law, but they most importantly lied to themselves underneath constitutional law. You see, federal law protects our property. The Fourth Amendment says we have the right to our paperwork, and our property without anyone encumbering our rights to them. Yet, people who are jealous and selfish and subtly immoral will open a door that's locked and steal. I can recall a time being home with all my lights off and just trying to enjoy life without having too much electrical bills, and finding that someone was trying to open my door. When I went to look through the window to see who it was, I said, "Who is it?" And the person lied. They had a little bag in hand and said they were Uber. Well, Uber doesn't carry little bags, so I knew that there must have been a tool for opening the door, and that was a black man who I was pretty sure was related to one of the complex apartment girls who was married to a black man, because of where he was looking when he was departing, trying to say, okay, I screwed up, someone was home, in the direction of that woman's apartment. You see, people illegally and immorally think they have the right to walk into someone's home and check them over when they work in those places, and they actually don't. But if I tell that truth, she may be offended. But she was regularly offended by me, and the reality was she was the one stalking me. She would often tell me she had seen my videos online. I didn't ask her to look at my videos online, which meant that she went out of her way to look me up online. She had no right to do that. I was regularly, from that point forward, finding things being moved about on my countertops, moved about in my home, things regularly stolen, and the only way that they came back was because I would start to talk about it in my audio casts, in my videos, about what was going on for my life. It was a monkey's foolish game. But when I came to this community, I expected to have a freedom of being able to be free and new and different. I had left behind my losses of my significant other of many years, the property that I set in a storage unit until I could find a place to live and to work and to breathe, and found that even while I was gone, people were pilfering from my property. Recently, I found that the woman that I love's clothes have been strewn all over this community, and if not, someone who dresses a hell of a lot like her has been here. But I keep finding them in the dumpsters that I've been diving in, looking for, not really food, but openly occasionally I find that, because people are moving out and they're just dumping full refrigerators of perfectly good, perfectly safe, perfectly unopened items. The truth is, when you live in poverty, people do that. There was a woman who often supported my mother with her skills of driving and being willing to go and be slept along on medical appointments, which really wasn't her lawful right to do. But my mother was ill in her mind, thinking that that woman and her 5 children making her like my mother was more important than her youngest child being able to take her places and do things with her and take the notes for the family. And that was my mother's illness, that she listened to every other human being about my life except for me, who ran my life. It's why my mother and I barely ever got along. My father was one of my greatest supporters, someone I loved dearly, and I've missed every single day since he left. But the truth is that when I talk about my life here, it's incredible how many people have continued to try to vie for my intellectual property. I've spoken honestly about having gone to a state-oriented facility, only to find that some law enforcement person or someone in their community of blacks decided they would watch what I was doing on the computer and start to steal my property. And I knew this quite clearly because I would put a certain number of copies that the Lord would ask me to into my bag, and then I would find that I'd wake up in the middle of the night and those copies would be gone, or they would be altered. It would be something different that I didn't print at all. Then a woman that I didn't know at all would walk up to me at the local food bank or food pantry where we could get lunch and start to talk to me about things that I never talked to one person about at all at that shelter, but they were on my thumb drive. So openly, that woman has immorally and illegally accessed that somehow. But I also found that someone changed my federally protected state ID, and a black man named Mike said, "Don't you have an ID?" And I simply said, "No, because whether I have one or not is not his right to know. And I have the right to protect myself from the blacks and the others who think they have a right to put their hands underneath 3 or 4 layers of clothing into a man's clothes to steal from a man. I am sleeping quite soundly, is true, but there are blacks and there are whites, especially women who like them, who are more than willing to put food something, intolerances, or shall we say sleeping agents, which I've seen in many trash cans around this community being thrown out, into people's food, to force them to sleep so that they are not caught in their lie of theft. The other morning I've had several pairs of socks that I just washed for my life stolen. When I wake up, I often find the goodies that I find in a trash can that I clean off and I sanitize and prepare to gift over or to literally sell if possible, completely gone. I just went back to a stash that I'm sort of responsible for that has clothing of someone I love and her children, and openly what I found was that someone was going through it all and literally taking things. Now, I'm not responsible or liable for memorizing every single thing that that woman has set aside for her life or her future with someone who loves her beyond words. But the truth is that people have the right to put their things down without it being stolen. Yesterday morning I realized I had way too much to carry, so I put my things in a plastic bag. I set them to the left of the stairways at a church in some bushes, hoping that like in other times that I've done this, that the items would be left alone. But during the morning of sorting, a black man who was cleaning off the property at the Jewish Federation, was overly interested in what I was doing. He came over to try to sell me a cup of coffee, which who knows what it was laced with, but openly I said no. He said, "I just thought you'd like one." And I thought, why the hell would you, a total stranger, think I would like a cup of coffee? Because the lie he told himself was that I like coffee, and I don't. I actually do not like coffee. I never drink coffee. I've never liked the smell of coffee on the breath of my parents. But there's always a liar who thinks they have the right to do things. There's always a liar who thinks they have the right to tell lies. There's always a liar who thinks they have the right to walk by and solicit information that they can give to their team to steal. So when I came back yesterday afternoon, around 2ish, the Lord said, it's time to go get your overalls that you just cleaned up. And I went up there and found my entire bag gone, which meant a laptop, its cords, all the business particular items that were in that particular leather case that I had found, completely gone, along with a Costco bag that was rather colorful, with clothing in it that I had planned to wash at my next opportunity. Whether the clothing was a perfect fit for me doesn't matter. What it is, though, is my right to set clothing aside for my life. I didn't have to schlep it where I was going yesterday because it's too much for a man to carry. Also, since when I was in jail, the asshole Muslim who was responsible for the medical care of the prisoners, which they often choose to use, ripped out my ACL. So that means it's much more difficult for me to be able to handle some things in my carrying of things. They also stole my vehicle in impound, which I can say quite clearly because who gives them the right to charge us for our own vehicles? They're the ones who immorally and illegally took it. There was no reason under the law for them to steal it, and I looked up the Indiana Code and the other state codes about this, that only if a vehicle is being considered as a part of a situation may it be impounded. But that law enforcement officer, female, Combs, I watched her walk away with my hard drives that were in that car. And she said she was going to impound it because there was way too much value in the vehicle. No, what they should have done is left it where we had negotiated for it to be left, and they should have driven by on a regular basis to make sure that no one was interfering with my lawful right to not only the property of my vehicle, but the property within my vehicle. A fully paid for business automobile. You see, it wasn't under a personal name, so they didn't have the right to actually impound it. So in truth, the state owes me a vehicle, and a very good one. The reality is, when I talk about the truths of my life, there are people in my family who would just love to say, no, he's mentally unwell. They allow themselves to do that so that they can have more inheritance of my father's estate, I'm sure. The reality is, I don't mind if they decide to steal all the money from my father's estate, but openly they don't listen to what I tell them about their foolishness and who they talk to and how they speak and on what they communicate about my life to total strangers. Their lies and their gossip have ruined my life. There's another woman that I know who also played hardball. She wanted to be taught about spirituality. I taught her a great deal, and I could even tell in the moments of time when she needed to literally use the lavatory. I would be told by the Holy Ghost to say, it's time to stop teaching because she needs to go to the bathroom. So I would stop teaching, and in my private classroom, she would go and use the facilities. Now this seems like TMI, but it is the truth of what the Lord will tell you when you're in total spiritual sync with someone that you care about deeply and that you're lovingly trying to help in some way or another. But even that woman lied about what happened between us in our relationship. She regularly put her hands on me, she regularly hugged me, she regularly did a lot of things that were a little unusual between a student and a teacher, but I allowed it because she had the need. And it is a spiritual class where people do often hug each other. I've been in those classes with other people, women in particular, and they are very cuddly and very loving. And that is the nature of faith, that Jesus loved on people, and so does other people. The reality is, though, that the Muslims in this community often lie about who they are and what they have rights to. And that is the reason I believe the Lord has led me to this community, to point out to officers who they need to be careful of, because anyone who's willing to steal from someone out of their bags at night, whether it's a game that they want to play as a child, or whether it's intentional in order to take property, to sell it, to do things with it, to just possess it without the rightful ownership of it, are people that we should be leery of. Because these are the people that are on a slippery slope that will do other things in our world, such as computer hacking, cybercrime, literally monetary theft, taking over people's lives and houses. And there are plenty of illegal aliens here in this community that the law enforcement officers are so busy driving by that they don't actually see. I'd love for Unit 22-220 to get out of her damn uniform and sit down on a curb with me, and I'll be more than happy to point out what I'm hearing in the soul that I have. You see, prophetic gifts are used quite often across the land, not only in the military, where they used to use wind talkers and horse whisperers, a few types, if you will, but at the same time, law enforcement also uses these type of people who know how to find people, who know how to help to do things. And it's sort of like the Minority Report, that I get prophetic help all the time of please do this today. And when I do it, then all of a sudden something amazing happens, and I am recognizing why I was told to do it that way. You see, all these gifts started to unfurl and unfold because I fell madly in love with one person that the Lord chose for my life. And openly, once you lose a spouse, you have the right to open yourself up to who would I like to have as a replacement love in my life. And sometimes those people walk into our life when we're wrapping up a relationship or it's about to end. And too many people miss out on those opportunities. Too many people also make the mistake of getting out of their relationships that they should be staying in. And then there are others who are married for, say, 7 years, and then they take another 7 just to get their divorces over with. And it's usually because their need for drama, their high queenness, or his illegal and immoral kingness are causing the problem. And who suffers are the children. You see, the Lord often brings a man into a woman's life who can help to rear children to be better than her previous spouse might help her to do. I can say this honestly because when I was giving spiritual guidance to married women, I would often have to express to them how important loving relationships with their husband was, how important it was to school their children in the real world of men, that theft is not acceptable, that immorally doing these things on social media is unwise because of how it impacts your future. But some women are foolish with their children, and some women just enable their children who have lots of money to do so. One of the ladies in my courses had a 60-acre ranch, literally, but there was a lot of loopholes in that situation. She would often communicate how her husband would bring home things from job sites, and I thought, don't those things belong to the people who he was working for? And the truth was, they did. I found that quite illegal and quite immoral, but who was I to tell? I had no idea to know where it came from, but I just found it offensive that a man making that much money felt the right to steal. You see, people who steal often have wives who lie, and openly, wives who lie often have men who steal. So when a woman lies and her husband steals, it's not really out of line that they're a match, but they're really a mismatch in heaven. They don't have the right accord with the Lord. And in order to have the right accord with the Lord, you have to have a person that you're willing to submit your life to say, this person will raise me up on eagle's wings. This person will keep me on the straight and narrow path. And this person loves me so much that they will most certainly give their life for mine if the chips are down, and that's what needs to happen. This person is intellectually my equal. This person is spiritually bound by the Lord to me, and this person will never stray, never cheat, and never leave me. If I'm in illness, if I'm in infirmity, if I'm needing my butt wiped, because that happens in old age. We don't talk enough about elderly, that is true. We don't talk enough about poverty and how people lose their rights and lose their lives when they lose a job. People are foolish when they quit jobs without having a new one in place, and then they get stuck, and then they lose their homes, and then they become burdens to other people's families. I know of one young man who literally is lazy in his ideas and is overly burdening a couple that he doesn't even have a relationship with in terms of the relative nature of his life. And I feel that they should throw him out. They as a couple are suffering because of his presence. A small apartment is no place for a threesome that is not a threesome. And I don't mean that in immoral ways, I just mean it's difficult to have a coupleship if you have another single person living in your home. Especially one that is antisocial, especially one that does not keep themselves physically clean, and especially one that is somewhat burdensome and that they don't feel any obligation to work harder to move on in life. Now, in my lifetime, what I'm upset about is that every time I got a business card during networking, one of the men from the shelter would steal those things from me while I slept. It's why I no longer sleep in the shelter, and sometimes I freeze at night. But openly, this past week, I went to do laundry someplace, and since that time I have noticed that my box of networking business cards, which many of which came back into my possession, is gone completely from my pack. So in life we have moments of time to decide what kind of a person we are in a moral world before the Lord. Because at the end of the day, at the end of our life, whenever the Lord calls us home with the angel of death, we are liable to God. And the damage you do to a human being's life, you are completely liable for under the Lord. You see, we began this audiocast talking about the international human rights laws that were sort of godly in its stead. and it's incration for Eleanor Roosevelt and her husband Teddy, who helped to put it into place. But the truth is, those rules were based and founded entirely on our federal Constitution, which many in local law enforcement completely think that they can obliterate because of local laws. And this is where their stupidity about the law, their failure in their criminal justice study, if they actually went to school for criminal justice, failed them. That actually every law that is higher trumps local law. So what that means is that city laws are trumped by state laws. State laws are trumped by federal laws, and federal laws are trumped by international tribunal laws. So if you didn't know that, pay attention, because anything you participate in could put you into a federal or a international tribunal council problem and a litigation issue that you will have to adjust for your entire life. You see, when you aggress against someone, you end up facing two options. One is a legal ramification, which means you could be sued or put in federal prison for it, or two, a lethal ramification. What I mean by lethal is that there is a point when someone who is being harassed and pushed upon in many, many ways would literally retaliate against you in an act of self-defense